Let's talk about islands today. So you have a blank piece of paper that looks like this, and it is 1 and 2 and 3 pages long. Now, our textbook doesn't go into quite enough detail about islands and speciation and adaptations, as well as you need to know for the AP test, so that's why this graphic organizer will be helpful for you. So what I'm going to do is normally I write on here with you, but then my writing is sometimes hard to read, so I'm going to show you the typed answers for you to copy down, but please listen to me talk and discuss these answers with you. And I'm going to go faster probably than you can write, so pause the video as you need to. So adaptive radiation is when species develop specialized characteristics due to limited resources such as food and territory. So this is a form of natural selection. So this is done through natural selection. So those with favorable characteristics and adaptations will survive. Those without favorable will die off. And over time, this radiation is kind of moving. It will move to species that are the best adapted to whatever habitat or climate they are in. So islands, now this is something that occurs on more than just islands, but islands in particular have this most often, and really specialized species. And again, islands are colonized by arriving from somewhere else. And then the last two things about islands, some characteristics, is that islands tend to have less apex predators. So you might want to circle less large apex predators because they need larger territories. So you're going to have less species like big wolves or jaguars or mountain lions. So your big apex predators. Now there are predators, like for example off our coast, there are the Channel Islands, and there's a fox that lives out there called the Channel Islands fox. And it's an endemic species that only lives on the Channel Islands off the coast of Ventura. And but it is a predator, but it's a little fox that is a predator out there because it doesn't need as big of a range or a territory as others do. And then also on islands, you're going to have, now invasive species are a problem everywhere, but they're going to be particularly a problem on islands. And so this is a definition. Invasive species are ones that are introduced and did not evolve in the habitat. And there's the in parentheses. They are especially damaging as they are generalists and outcompete native species, which are usually specialists. I'll say often specialists. The native species. Pause if you're not caught up, but let's go on to the next page when you are ready. Okay, so over here, the next page, we have island biogeography theory. And so you have the lowest species richness, so the number of different species. This is a term you need to know. So species richness is the number of different species. Is going to be, there we go, the smallest and furthest from the mainland. And the opposite down here, the highest species richness is large islands close to the mainland. Why? Well, when species migrate, they have a better chance of finding a large and close island. Also, larger islands have more food and niches for species to survive. Pause as you need to. All right, our last page up here. So habitat fragmentation takes this theory of island biogeography on islands and applies it to the mainland. So on the mainland, like where we live, we don't live on an island, how is habitat fragmented into little islands of habitat, of native areas? So logging roads and converting natural areas to agriculture, homes, and development. Those are the things that fragment habitat. So why does this decrease biodiversity? Well, some species can't cross whatever that is, the road, the housing development, the agricultural field. You would think, oh, well, you know, can't species cross a farm field? Well, some do and some don't. Some apex predators need large intact territory, so it has to be intact. Mountain lions are like that. Some smaller species, such as soil organisms, cannot cross a road or anything like that. They could probably go under the road, but not if they're surface soil species. There's another term you have to know, edge effects. And this is a term that will, again, you have to know for your exams. Species are more susceptible to disease or illness on the edges of a habitat. And so overall, the biodiversity of the inner habitat will decrease as a result. And how do we fix this? So how do we mitigate? So mitigate is an academic vocabulary word that is often used on the AP test. Mitigate means to fix. So we can help fix the problems of habitat fragmentation by creating habitat corridors, create wildlife preserves, etc. So here's a picture. So the inner habitat is like this. The edge habitat is here, and edge habitats tend to have less biodiversity and more susceptible to diseases that come in or illnesses that would come in to plants. Plants get diseases, to fungus, bark beetles, or insect that cause big problems to trees. And so they're more likely on the edges than the inner. And then you're going to have less biodiversity on the edges, but it's kind of interesting because you're going to have different species. So really on the edges, you're going to have less biodiversity. And this one's going to be more biodiversity. And here on the edges, you might have some different species. So I'm going to write some different species. So for some species, it's their niche as well. So it's not all bad. It does provide the edges some habitat for some niches that like that edge. Okay, and so this is an example of fragmentation here. They built a road right down the middle of this habitat. And so now you have less intact and you have more edge. So more edge, less inner. And so your species here are going to decline overall, less biodiversity, less species. So a habitat corridor is kind of like a bridge that goes over the road. So some places they build a bridge over the road, and some they build like a tunnel under the road. So it can be a bridge or a tunnel that is built so species actually do use it. They find that species kind of roam kind of up and down a road trying to figure out the best place to cross because they know it's dangerous. And so oftentimes they'll come across a bridge to go over or a tunnel to go under. And so these corridors that we build for species really do work. All right, so you also have to know something called the Sloths dilemma. It's an acronym: single large or several small reserves. So this is kind of a debate. should we, in terms of building reserves, so this is another way to fix, so wildlife preserves is another way to fix, and so your preserve discussion is down here. What is better? Single large reserves help large predators, but several small can bring less competition for species and allow them to thrive. Inner habitat increases with large areas, but edge species increase with smaller areas. So again, it's kind of pros and cons to both. And so what do you build? What do you preserve? And so those are not easy answers to find. All right, and that's it for these notes.